Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Inside the Mind, a podcast about athletes. Today's guest is Paul Clarke, who is a sport performance and business coach from Ireland, and we really got into in-depth conversation today about some coaching strategies that's worked for him over the years. Before we get into it, roll the intro.
Sometimes you talk to, performance psychologists, sports psychologists, that talk to those people, and, you kind of get a lot from them in terms of what I can bring into my own sessions, just to, bring that kind of mental aspect into the actual session when players are doing their physical, their technical, tactical work. How do you keep bringing in that mental coaching as well, that aspect of it, as opposed to just doing something where they're kind of thinking and doing. So I always find that interesting.
Yeah. And I saw that you're kind of involved in a lot of things at the moment. There's your Match Fit. Is that the company?
Yeah, Match Fit is the name of the business. Yeah, it's Match Fit is the business, and effectively that's the sports side of things in terms of, what I work in there is kind of my own background is obviously in coaching, but also strength and conditioning and sports science. So kind of an awful lot of the time you see these how would you put it, these tools in the toolbox, coaching, sports science, etc., kind of sitting in these splendid silos, and everyone's doing wonderful work, but there's no integration in it. And I kind of go, well, how can you truly have a player-centered environment when you don't have that integration there? So it's kind of working with people to bring that integration about. That's number one. And then either or just working, say, with people in terms of, say, sports science, and saying, okay, what are you doing? How are you doing it? And then how is that fueling the player-coach relationship and the performance sports scientist-coach relationship? And then at a higher level, do the sporting directors just see this as toys for the boys, or do they see it as a business enabler and therefore something vital that they must keep investing in? And by and large, that comes down to the messaging people kind of give about it and the communication around it. And, it's generating insights as opposed to information, actionable pieces of information, which is an insight that a coach can take and run with to ensure that, practice or training or something like that is far more efficient, far more effective. So is that, you're bringing up the levels all the time, and therefore then that translates into performance, hopefully translates into results, then off-field results are a bit better, the commercial staff are happier, etc., etc., etc. Now that's a little bit linear, what I described there. It's not quite just as linear as that, and it's quite as beautifully stacked as that, but ultimately that's what it's about. It's you get out of it what you put into it. So if it's a team that's, trying to move from second to first, that's a challenge. Equally well, if it's a team that's just trying to stay mid-table and punch above their weight because everybody else has bigger budgets, you're saying, okay, well, look, here's some tools that you can do that. So, for example, people kind of, one of the buzz things at the minute is GPS systems, right? So obviously that's one of the things I do, but kind of what I say to people is, well, why do you want it? Do you just want it because the rest have it, or do you actually have a really, really clear sight on what this is going to do and how you're going to use it and how you're going to manifest it and how you're going to use it as an agent for change? So that's always an interesting conversation. So that's effectively what I do from a sports business point of view.
Yeah. The GPS, that's just talking about kind of tracking the players on the pitch or the field.
Yeah. It's quite it's very, I suppose they're very physical metrics at heart. So your distance, your intensities, maximum heart rate, that type of thing. Really to kind of come up with training load figures just to make sure that the training prescriptions are on the money. So it's like the Goldilocks principle. It's not too much, not too little, it's just right. And it's effectively that. It's trying to hit the sweet spot collectively and individually, because you're going to have older players, younger players, that type of thing, which is a skill in itself. But then it's also, I think that the future of it is kind of integrating. So it's almost like looking at, it's, if I show you a photo of a guy in a football outfit, you'll say, who's that? You'll say it's a footballer, and say, well, no, it's not, it's a person. So what I mean by that is that, say from a sports psychology point of view, if players are managing themselves better as people away from the group, away from training and that, and they're landing to a place where they're far better, feeling far better in life. So they move from an average of feeling 6 out of 10 to 8 out of 10. That manifests in performance. It has to. Because if I say to you now, right, how are you feeling, Adam? Top of your head, gut feel, how you feel, and you said to me 6, right? Now, regardless of why you're a 6, I could kind of go, Jesus, why is he's earning $10,000 a week and la 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 la. Why is he only a 6? It doesn't matter. You're only a 6. You think you are. That's it. End of story. The point is this: is that you won't suddenly go out in the field today in training and perform at an 8. You'll know this. You can't outperform your perception of yourself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the best you can give today is a 6. Now, if this is an ongoing issue over weeks, you're training at a 6. You can't perform at a 9 and train at a 6. It probably just doesn't happen.
Right.
So I think what you get to do is the kind of the next level in terms of this monitoring thing is to kind of, it's one of the tools that we have, is that you integrate the wellness and the RPE with the kind of the objective stuff, the load stuff, if you like, but then being able to see correlations, in terms of what's happening when the guys aren't sleeping well, etc., etc., etc. So, players that aren't sleeping well, they're having diffies outside, of course, is going to affect their ability to train. But if it affects the ability to train, it affects the ability to perform, and so on and so on. If you've got a critical mass of those in your team, you're in trouble.
Right.
You're compromised in a big way. So it's kind of really using the data, I guess, and integrating the data to develop the person every bit as much as the player, because they're a person 24 hours a day, whereas they're a player, depending on the level they're playing at, they're a player X amount of hours a week. Yeah. So it's a case of saying, how do we use that to help them in the other 150 hours of the week or whatever?
I think, our role, or other people's role as coaches or consultationists or whatever it may be, I think the end goal for all of this is kind of for the athlete to be able to self-manage their own behavior when we're not there, right? We don't want any athlete or coach, for that matter, to be dependent on someone else to perform at their optimal level. I think it's a weird sort of business, I would say, in that, like, if an athlete gets to a point where they can self-manage their own behavior, and to a certain aspect might not need a coach to the same degree as they once did, but yeah. I think that's the end goal for all of this.
I think it changes the player-coach relationship in a positive sense. I mean, I think, ultimately, I think what you want on the field is an independent decision maker who takes calculated risks and who can kind of live in the moment and make respond instead of react and all of these things, rather than looking over and go, well, coach, what do I do? You don't want that. So, I mean, that's a skill. I view that as a skill, and it's something that's got to be fostered and developed over a really, really long time. But like that too, then that changes the coach-client relationship, the coach-player relationship, in the sense that the coach or coaches then have to truly develop as well. So I think you move on from this scenario where you've got somebody says that, oh, I'm coaching for 10 years, but it's not really, it's 1 year, 10 times. Mm-hmm. You really have to, improve year on year on year, which effectively ensures that you're a better coach, which then, obviously then it's for the benefit of the players. So if everyone's in agreement that we want a player-centered environment that's driven by coaches, well, then everyone's got to be at the top of their game, because the players, the athletes, interchangeable term, they can only probably perform to the level of the coaching they're getting, but then I can only coach at the level I'm able to coach at, unless I'm developing myself, unless I'm sharpening my saw all the time as well, So if we're both improving, as that old saying, iron sharpens iron, then we're kind of there's positive tension, positive friction there, so we're kind of forever sharpening each other. So the players are pushing me, but I'm also pushing them, but the rising tide is lifting all the boats up. Probably a challenging enough environment, but then they're the kind of edgy environments that you see winning in business. Whether they're small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses, they're the ones that foster creative tension and in a positive sense. So that everyone's always, even though we're doing well, but we can do better.
Right.
And it's a motivating environment, I think.
Yeah. So much I've seen in the media recently is kind of, you touch on it a bit, is the discussion of like an old school coach versus a new school coach, in a sense, and kind of how coaches, you see a lot of time. So there's an example in Canada here recently with a couple of hockey coaches in the National Hockey League, where they have more old school approaches to things about player development and kind of team culture. And they ended up losing their jobs because things leaked to the media. And there was one example where a coach took a rookie on the hockey team aside and asked him to like rank the players on the team from hardest working to least working. And then his intention was kind of to show the rookie what players to kind of model after and what players not to model after. But then the coach ended up leaking that list to the team.
Sure.
So there is a whole thing to that. So
it's conflict then.
Yeah. So the whole thing about, old school approaches versus new school approaches, and, something that may have worked in the 80s or the 90s may not necessarily work in today's society or today's culture. So I really liked how you brought up that the player and the coach almost have to work together, and that you're almost helping each other. The coach helps the player, but to a sense, the player helps the coach in telling the coach what is working and what isn't working.
Yeah, I think, you see, it's kind of, it's an interesting one, kind of that old school, new school. I mean, it's a terminology that's on it. I think people will always kind of look at, we'll really, it's something I was thinking about this morning, actually, that you mentioned it. And people will always kind of look at the winning coaches and say, oh, what are they doing? Not really kind of taking taking note of the context, the nuances of their environment, that it works there, but it might not work for anybody else. Equally well, it's probably a lot of the time it's valuable to look at the places where it's not working. So what you mentioned there, like what that guy did, I don't know the story, but it would strike me as being not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but his execution and his follow through was probably not right. His intention was right, but he probably did something he would have got away with many, many years ago. But that he kind of wasn't sensitive to, I don't mean people today, but just the group that he's got right now. Some groups are far more sensitive than others, and that's okay. That's, I don't think that's good or bad. It just is. But equally well, I think it's about, I don't know what you think, but I think, it comes back to the clubs getting the right fit of a coach for their environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit more context maybe in the situation was that the coach, he was coached in the National Hockey League for maybe 16, 17 years. And the team that he took over at that time, it's a bunch of young guys that probably were maybe 5 or 6 when this coach started coaching the league. So I think that just the culture that the rookies and younger players were brought up in were maybe fitting the coach's style. And there was lots of talk in the media about kind of how this coach wasn't a good fit for the team in the first place. And it kind of got me thinking even, you can look at a team on paper and they could have all the talent in the world, but you see so many examples in real life that, for example, Leicester City, I always go back to Leicester City when they won the Premier League, that, didn't necessarily have they didn't have the top 11 players in the league, but that coaching culture and the way the coach was able to get the most the players is kind of what led to their success.
Yeah, it's a chemistry thing, I guess. I think there's a bit of luck. I think possibly, the old school approach of developing a good coaching intuition to know where you fit and know where you don't fit, and having that conviction and that honesty of conviction to know, look, do you know what? I'd love to try and take the team that are second in the league to first in the league, but you know what? They're not my fit. My fit is whatever it might be. Do you know what I mean? Equally well, I'd love to take that gang of young players and bring them from mid-table to winning. Well, maybe you're not the right person to do that. You know what I mean? Maybe you're more of a teacher than a facilitator, or maybe you're more of a director than or whatever it might be. Maybe, because everyone's got this mix of style between authoritarian and democratic and all these lovely terms. And it probably doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It just means it is who you are right now. And that you've got a certain niche that you fit well with. Equally well, probably someone who's a great coach in male sports might be a great coach in female sport, and vice versa. So it's, I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of coaching, in terms of what you bring to the party, but it's just those subtle little things, in terms of behaviors, approaches, vocabulary, all of these kind of things that make the difference, really. And there's probably a little bit of luck involved too, in terms of where you land and who you land with, and your ability to read the situation, see where people are at and where folks are at. Because you probably have, certainly at a pro level, you're on with the ice hockey guys, there's probably a lot more scrutiny, I guess, now on those guys, in terms of, media insights, fans, there's probably 2 or 3 layers of management above the head coach now, whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago there wasn't. So the commercial side of the club have far more clout. Some of these clubs you look at and you kind of go, you know what, the ice hockey or the football end of it is just basically a division of the whole company, really.
Right.
Albeit a valuable one, but
Yeah.
it's a division of the company. If you kind of look at some of these franchises that are bloody huge, what goes on the ice or the pitch is a division of the overall. It's not the be all and end all anymore. It's a division of it. So, it's kind of looking, that's what's changed really. And then obviously, players, I suppose, they're more powerful entities because they got more powerful agents, and the agents have relationships with the media, etc., etc. So, yeah, unless you've got and that's kind of coming back to us saying, unless you've kind of got a performance team that's well gelled and works well together as a unit. So say your coaching staff, your strength and conditioning, your sports science, your medical, your psychology, your performance people, unless they're all on the same page, really glued well together and pulling in the right direction, you're going to find it tough. All of a sudden you could become an island. Whereas if everyone in a club or an organization knows that we truly have a performance team here, a performance support team, and they're they back each other, but they're all on the same page. That's it's a stronger proposition, number one. I think it's a more sustainable proposition, number two. I think players react well to it as well. They know that all their needs are being catered towards.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of touch on it a bit, but just the challenges of just being a coach. I think maybe it's not people's first thought about being a coach of, how just mentally and physically taxing it is if you're truly committed to your job. I saw that you had shared an article, I think a couple of weeks ago, about coaches burnout. And, I've talked in the past a lot about athlete burnout and, that you have to take appropriate measures to try not to get to that point.
Yeah.
Coaches is the exact same thing because, I mean, I don't, I know a bit about the culture, I guess. I follow a lot of soccer in Europe, so I have a bit of that. But I know specifically, North America and the National Football League, if you're a coach for an NFL team, like it's a 365-day job, like in 8 to 12 hour days and all that. So I think a lot of people maybe don't have that perspective yet of coaching, is that it's a mentally taxing field if you're into it.
It's kind of like, I don't know how to phrase this, but there's an element of psychopathy to it. I don't mean a psychopath, but in a good sense. Being able to spin all these plates at the same time and keep them spinning is quite unnatural. And there's a few, and of course it's like everything else. You read about these freaky ones. Oh, they get by on 4 hours sleep, and you're going, Jesus Christ, they are the outliers. Most people can't, like 99% of people can't do that. But then everyone tries to model that, and it's like more and more work harder. And hard work's fine, but it does come to the point where unless the coach has a great support environment with A, family, and then B, the people they're working with, all of a sudden they can become isolated. They're an island, and possibly feel, right, the media are pulling against me, club are pulling against me, Lady Luck is pulling against me, all of these kind of things. And then how can you do a job properly? You simply can't. And I think you end up, there's the possibility of ending up firefighting, instead of actually having a clear head and driving on ahead. You're just trying to put out all the fires around you instead of gaining forward momentum. And it's one of these things. I think the article I shared, it's one of those ones I was trying to write myself, but I couldn't quite get there. In fairness, that's why I was quite envious of him. I forget the chap's name. He's a sports director in the US, Patrick. I think it's Billington University he's with, but he's an athletic director. Sorry. But he kind of hit the nail on the head, and I think there's a bit of an epidemic of it out there because coaches aren't really that willing to kind of come forward and say, yeah, do you know what, I'm struggling a little bit here. And at the center of it all is, by and large, sports coaches identify themselves by what they do. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm a coach. And it's like, well, no, you're not. You're human. Yeah. You're a husband. You're a boyfriend. You're a girlfriend. You're a father. You're whatever. And that's quite insidious. I think that creeps in on people. And it's fine when things are going well. When you're winning and you get a bit of the hero and that. But inevitably, when you hit this downward slope, which most do, actually everyone does, if you're not well armed to deal with that and respond to that, you end up reacting to that, a bit like players do in a crisis situation, and it can go really, really wrong. It can affect people's health and all sorts of stuff. And equally well, if your players are looking tired, have a look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Chances are you're probably not the best of shape.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one. I think it's one of those ones that's going to kind of come to the fore a little bit more, because I don't know what it's like, say, in the States or Canada, but certainly over here, there's not really any that spring to mind, any kind of coaches associations where that type of thing is looked at closely and monitored, measured, managed.
Yeah.
And it's probably to do with the transience of coaches. They jump from job to job and country to country, and I get that too. But it is something absolutely worth looking at, because it's a personal welfare thing at the end of it all. So if I'm struggling personally, how in the name of Christ can I give everything to players? I can't. And that's it's probably a one for sporting directors to look at and say, well, what kind of a culture are we fostering here? Are we fostering a culture where coaches can thrive as well as players? Because you need that. I mean, I think you can't have one without the other. You've got to have coaches and players thriving for a positive and a progressive environment. Otherwise, you probably progress for a few years and then you go down and you come back and you go down and you come back. And that roller coaster thing is quite appealing and sexy, because it's a bit of an adrenaline buzz, but ultimately people suffer, when you look at the stats, I don't know what it's like in say Canadian sport, hockey, basketball, baseball, that kind of thing. But, some coaches kind of get to a level and then they disappear without trace. They're never ever seen again or heard of again. You kind of go, what happened then? Where did they go? They were good enough once upon a time to get to there, and all of a sudden they're gone. And you go, what happened? It's you simply probably, I wouldn't think you don't really see it in business too much, where somebody kind of gets with a big job and then it's gone forever and a day. It's a strange. You've got to perform. You can't sugarcoat things. You've got to perform in your role, but it can be that can be counterproductive, I think, when that axe is swinging over your head, or certainly when you feel that axe is just swinging there all the time.
Yeah.
You're under pressure. A player can't perform that way, so how can a coach?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you kind of touched on it a bit, but as a coach, you have to wear a lot of different hats. You're not only a coach, but you got to be a bit of like a people manager for your team and everything. Are there any coaches that you personally kind of look up to and try to model your clinical practice after, or?
Let me think. Yeah, do you know what? I read a lot of them. There's some here in Ireland I would have read up on that people over your neck of the woods wouldn't know. But then there's a guy actually I've been looking at quite a bit of his stuff lately, and he's ladies college basketball in the States, Gino Auriemma.
Okay.
He's from University of Connecticut. He's there a long time, but when he landed in the 90s, they were at nothing really. They were just they were just crap. And then they went on. He developed a program, and they went on. They've been really, really successful. He's an interesting character in terms of he's dealing with college kids, girls, 18. I'm guessing they're probably 18 to 21, 22.
Yeah, 18 to 21 usually is the range.
In and around that, yeah. From all over the country, all different backgrounds, poor, middle class, wealthy, whatever. So he's trying to gel all of these, and yes, they're good players, because the program is such at a high level now, it attracts the good players. So, but that said, that can be equally challenging. So he's kind of gone from a place where they hadn't the country's best players knocking on the door to a place where they have, but he's kind of managed to sustain that environment. So he's an interesting character, actually, and I think some of the clips you see, there is quite a mix of old school and new school. I'm not sure I like those terms, but they're used, so everybody gets it. So he's an interesting character. I kind of. You see, it's quite hard to read about any middle-of-the-road coaches as well.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to write about them.
Right.
Well, I like it when you do kind of, there's some articles you just happen upon, in different publications, ESPN magazine or the New Yorker or something bizarre like that. You know what I mean? There's good business coaches out there as well. But I think, I'd be quite wide reading on those. I kind of like reading as well about people that punch above their weight, they mightn't actually win anything,
Right.
but they're punching above their weight, or their team, their club are very much punching above their weight. So they're always worth a read, because even though they're in different nuances, different contexts, etc., different environments, you can still probably learn more about them, because I think they're more willing, they've more failures to share. I'll say actually, it's not failures as such, learnings. They've more experiences to share that are probably relevant to the wider population of coaches, if you like.
Yeah.
But it's quite, it can be hard to find decent ones, Adam, because you know yourself, the internet, everyone's a hero, everyone's an expert. So it can be quite hard to kind of discern from who actually knows their eggs and who doesn't.
Yeah. You mentioned it a bit, but kind of the whole thing about, some coaches, they're kind of more middle, they take on teams that are more middle of the pack, but they're constantly, going a little bit above their expectations. And just kind of thinking on that, the one thing I never really thought about coaching is just how challenging and maybe how big of an accomplishment it is to be able to motivate players that are kind of in that middle of the pack group, right? When I think more of like, in American sports, it's a little bit more tricky, because when you finish last place in the league, you get the next,
you get
in the draft, you get the first pick, right?
Yeah.
Whereas more so in something like, soccer in Europe, or even something like auto racing, like Formula One.
Yeah.
If you're finishing last, there's no real
Tough.
kind of easy way to get back to the top, right? So when you have a team like, I'll even take Formula One for an example. Like, you have obviously Ferrari and Mercedes there, the top two, and then you have those other kind of middle of the pack teams that almost never win. And I think as a coach, being able to motivate players in the sense that, like, you haven't won in X amount of years, I think that takes a lot of skill, and I think that's a really underappreciated part of some coaches.
Yeah, I think so. It's, you kind of look at, I'll call them middle of the road teams. I mean, which is not derogatory in any sense. But I guess even in college sport, any sport over there, my sense would be, if you've really, really then got to know the players, because they're probably good, but they're not great, but they have room for improvement, and it's a matter of kind of painting that picture for them, like, who do you want to be in 5 years' time? What do you want people saying about you now, as distinct from what do you want people to think about you? I don't really, you shouldn't care what other people think. They're entitled to their opinion. But what do you want them to say about you? Wow, he or she has improved by 20%, or whatever it might be. And I think when you can identify that about the individuals and about the group, I think then you have a mandate to kind of go, look, let's put stuff in place here that can help towards that can drive towards that, and hope to make that dream a reality, and then sort out, like, who's interested and who's committed. Adam says he wants to, he's a soccer player, middle of the road MLS team. He wants to play for a top MLS team in the next 5 years. Okay, well, let's see, is Adam interested or committed to that? If he's committed and everyone around him are committed to their own individual goals, well, then we're in business, because you can't achieve that on your own.
Right.
But you can achieve that, if there's 12 of us all after different things, and we're all vulnerable enough to share that, or 20 of us, and we're all vulnerable enough to share what we all want, coaches and players or athletes, all of a sudden, the onus is on you. Well, I'm going to help the other 19 get what they want. But then I now know there's 19 others trying to help me get what I want. Because by and large, they're quite connected in what everybody wants. They're not too dissimilar. So, but if everyone's, trying to make the boat go faster, so to speak, well, then you get what you want, I get what I want. Do you know what I mean? It's being a bit more altruistic about things. It's behaving as a tribe,
right,
as opposed to a team of talented individuals. Now, you need a bit of talent, but sometimes, as you said there, because of drafts or whatever, or finances, you just can't get a Michael Jordan out of thin air. You have to come last to get him.
Yeah.
But and not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone's poor enough to come last, but good enough to come first. So
yeah.
What does everybody else do? And I think it is around that, because if everyone's, but it requires a huge level of vulnerability, which has to be probably led by the coach and coaching staff to say, well, here's who I am, here's what I want to do, and then here's where I'm targeting from development, and there's a vulnerability there, but then within that, then somebody like yourself plays a huge role within that, because you're not just, the head doctor guy, talking to the players. I mean, you have an active role to play with the coaches from their point of view, so they can become better coaches, communicators, whatever it might be. And I think that will be a good approach. It's a little bit utopian maybe, but
Yeah.
But how else do things change?
Right.
Unless you break molds, things don't change. You're just going to be a mid-level team, just doing enough. But Jesus, who wants to do enough?
No. Yeah.
I mean, you get caught out eventually.
Yeah.
If you're a mid-level team and your aim is to stay mid-level, that's probably not sustainable, really. It's harder to sustain than it is to sustain a winning team, I guess, because those underneath you are chasing quite hard.
And then those above you are always trying to stay on top too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you're kind of in that squeezed middle place. So it's it's a challenging one, but that said, if a coach and coaching staff can display those behaviors in a challenging environment like that, there's nothing to say that they won't and can't develop on to go on to bigger and better things, whatever they deem bigger and better things to be. Perhaps it's staying with the same team, program, club, organization for 5, 6, 7 seasons. That could be, really, really good. That chap actually, if Jesus forget his name, actually, he's with the Boston Celtics. He's been there a while now. He's a young enough coach, the head coach.
Oh, I think it's Brad Stevens.
Yeah. He's an interesting kind of guy, and they're interesting that they're sticking with him. I mean, they're not. I guess it's probably a demand enough environment given the history of their club and stuff, but he seems to be hanging in there despite the fact that he's having ever better seasons from a percentages point of view, without actually kind of winning anything. And I could stand corrected here, but I'm not sure they're contenders, for want of a better phrase. But they're improving over the last 5 seasons, and it's an interesting one because generally clubs don't have that level of patience, for obvious reasons, because the business results are tied to the actual competitive results, that type of thing. So it's an interesting one as well.
Yeah. I mean, kind of a more of a hometown example of the Toronto Raptors, where they had a coach, Dwayne Casey, that he was there maybe about 4 or 5 years, and he took over a team that was, always out of the playoff race. Like, they were just always bottom of the barrel team. He took them right to a playoff team and actually did quite well in the regular season, but couldn't get it done in the playoffs, mostly because every year he ended up playing LeBron James, and I mean, he's hard to beat.
Yeah, sure.
But then the same thing, they were kind of upper middle of the pack, and it's weird when you think about it in pro sports in North America, at least, that you can finish top 8 in the league and make the playoffs, but if you don't make it to the finals, it's almost like a failed season.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like so for someone like Toronto media gave the GM and the owner a lot of flack for firing the coach because he brought this team from the bottom to the top.
But
he just couldn't get them over that extra hump. Ended up making the coaching change, and of course they won the championship last year. But
that can happen. I mean, it's kind of sometimes the wrong decision gets the right outcome, and the right decision gets the wrong outcome. That can happen too, and I think that kind of thing is lauded, or the general management knew what they were doing, and perhaps they did. I mean, maybe that guy was a developmental type coach that brought that group as far as he could, and just something needed to change, a few little things here and there, and another guy came in and just by tweaking a couple of things got them across the line. But then equally well, maybe the competitors just came back a few percent as well. So there's bigger picture stuff there. I think it kind of, I always look at those things and you kind of go, all you can do is do your best all the time, but communicate that and communicate the circumstances. And it comes back to, again, being a good communicator with club, media, whatever it might be, that people understand exactly what's happening without knowing the inner workings of the team. That's quite sacred, but that they understand the context of what's going on. You know, and then like there's a lot of other things as well. I mean, I don't obviously have heard of the Raptors, but you know, you might say, okay, well, what was the average age of the team when that guy got them? Physically, perhaps at the end of his cycle, they were just coming into their peak as athletes. You know, they had 4 or 5 years serious conditioning behind them, experiences behind them, etc., etc. And now it was time. Now it was their time. You know, but that I think that's just one of those things that happen. Unfortunately, it grabs headlines, and then everyone says that's the right thing to do.
Right.
You know, just get this guy to get somebody across the line. And there could be a grain of truth in it in terms of there are different types of coaches out there. As I said, some more developmental, some more, you know, kind of 1 season wonder, 2 season wonders. You know, that's okay. I mean, but again, I think from your own point of view as a coach, or as someone working in performance, it's important not to see that as a reflection. The end result is a complete reflection of you, you know, that there are so many variables involved in terms of, you know, injuries, player age, all these kind of things. I mean, you know, things that people never ever see. I mean, you know, changing personal habits of players could have taken 3 or 4 seasons. And the effect was only felt when that coach was gone. Yeah, he was the one that put all these things in place to change all of these myriad of habits that required changing on and off the court.
Yeah.
You know, so it's perhaps, you know, he was the one that signed better backup players. You know what I mean?
Right.
The guys that came off the bench, maybe they had better bench players than anybody else ultimately. I don't know, obviously, but you know, some people, you know, do that and kind of say, well, you know, if our top three are as good as everyone else's top three, we're really what we need to focus on the next five.
Yeah.
That our next five are fucking way better than everyone else's.
Yeah.
You know, because the top three are the top three, and can you change that too much? Yeah, maybe not. You know, it's down to drafts and stuff like that. So, you know, but it's an interesting, it's an interesting conversation to have, that one. There's no doubt about it, because you know, unless you can kind of get in the mindset of a sporting director or a GM, which is the same thing really, I guess, it's quite hard to kind of know what's going on in their minds, because they're getting it from the top in the business sense, and they're kind of like the squeeze middle. The coaches in one ear, you know, directors in another ear, and they're getting it from both sides, and they kind of have to step back and look in and ultimately make that decision.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one, but I think, if you've got, goes back to what I was saying, if you can kind of foster that performance team, that collective, it insulates you a little bit from that type of thing, but maybe not too much. It's the nature of sport, I guess.
Yeah.
That people are quite reactive.
Yeah. One last topic that I wanted to chat with you about. I don't know if you've ever experienced this personally through your practice, or maybe if you had any thoughts of how to deal with the situation. But one thing that I always wonder about with the kind of coach athlete or coach player relationship is, obviously, you know, for a certain position, there can only be one starter.
Sure, yeah.
You might have 2 or 3 guys fighting for the one spot. And
Yeah.
some athletes can kind of take that approach where, you know, they put the team ahead of themselves, and, you know, they can accept taking a lesser role, but still, you know, with the mindset they want to get back to that role, but in the short term, be kind of okay with it. And of course, other athletes, they want to be in that role and all the time, and they take it maybe a little bit more personally. Have you ever had to deal with maybe a situation like that, and maybe what were some of the techniques to be able to amend that relationship?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think every coach has it all the time. And I think one thing that I've come to learn is that you've got to deal with players and athletes. You've got to deal in facts, not just opinions, because they don't have to accept an opinion, but a fact is a fact. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, I think there's enough resources at a coaches or coaching teams' disposal to say, okay, what constitutes good performance? Why are we picking Mr. X over Mr. Y, or girl A over girl B? Why are we doing that? Why would we do that? What are our key things that we're looking for in terms of our performance? So what constitutes great performance? And then if the performance analysis function is geared towards pulling out those details, if the sports science stuff is geared towards pulling out those details, if I call it the medical wellness function is geared towards pulling out those details. If the management is geared towards pulling out those details, you're in business. So performance analysis, if your analysis is geared to pulling out just information, well, then you're at nothing. But if it's geared towards pulling out insights about players and the collective, certain 3-4 big things that our performance hinges on. So for example, in basketball or ice hockey could be generating turnovers or whatever it might be, but you get the idea. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a fact that you can report back to the player. And it's something can be measured in training practice sessions as well. To say, look, over the last week, your amount of turnovers hasn't been as strong as this guy or this girl. Now, we can talk about why that is, but on the basis of that, I have to put this guy or girl into the team. Equally well, from a sports science point of view, your work rate is not high enough. Your fitness level is not high enough yet. You're fit enough to go for 3/4 of the game, but not the full game. And so on and so on. From a management point of view, well, look, you told at the start of the season, you targeted getting better at A, B, and C as your big rocks. But we're not seeing progress on those. Equally well, from a standards point of view, you've been late a few times. You're supposed to go talk to Adam about this, and this. You haven't shown up. You're not reporting that you're getting your sleep levels. You're telling us that you're not getting 8 hours a night. So you're talking in facts all of a sudden, and not Big Brother type facts where Big Brother's watching you, but facts that everyone's bought into at the start of a season or start of a cycle to say, look, lads, does everybody agree here that these are the big rocks? That if we're all nailing all of these things all the time, our chances of success go way up, because these are all controllable. These are things all within our control. So we can't control the referee, we can't control the weather, we can't control the crowd, the media, We can't control any of those things. But the things we can control are all of these, and we're going to monitor them, measure them, whatever phrase we want to use, and report back when things are going great, and equally well when things aren't going so great. So that everybody understands where they stand. They understand why they are playing, they understand why they're not playing. So that, it's not this conversation. Adam says to me, why am I playing, Paul? Well, Adam, we've been kind of looking at you and you're not really performing that well in training. Like, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Really, like, what does that mean? Because you're annoyed already, right? And now I come out with an opinion, which is probably at odds with your opinion. and then we've got this immovable object, unstoppable force kind of thing happening.
Yeah.
Now, if there's 2 or 3 or 4 of you, which there probably will be in a squad of 15, 20, whatever you've got, if that's not being managed properly, and we're not talking in objective facts, but facts that you can take control of and improve on. So can you improve, say, physically? Yes. Can you show signs that your decision making is getting better? Yes. Can you show signs that your technical, tactical execution is getting better? Yes. Can all those things be measured? Yes. Decision making, fair enough. That's a bit woolly. What's going on outside? Are you eating properly? Are you hydrated? Sleeping? All of these kind of things. Can we look and measure all of those? Yes. And then all of a sudden, all of these things that you do for 150 hours a week away from the team matter for the team in that small window of time. It's the manifestation of it. It's just, I look at it as it's a compound interest effect. It's putting money in a bank that gives you interest. Mm-hmm. As opposed to putting money in a bank or into a casino that doesn't give you interest.
Right.
You can get lucky, all right, but probably not that often. Whereas if you're putting money into an investment that's going to accrue 3, 4, 5% every year on year, it's the same thing as putting focus on habits that are going to accrue month on month. And I think if you talk, it's a bit of a long answer to give you, but I think if you're talking in facts to people can't find it hard to argue with facts, especially if they were kind of back at the start of the whole program, if they were a co-author of those facts, if everyone kind of nodded and went, yeah, this feels like the right thing to have in place. Mm-hmm. This looks good. This means it's objective. If I'm not playing, you can tell me why across 6, 8, 10, whatever amount of metrics. Equally well, if I am playing, I can see progress all the time. I can see the the trend line going up, 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 you know? And it's kind of like, as I always say, I mean, like, it's almost like two parallel lines: decent performance, poor performance. I mean, you know, changes that aren't all that discernible, but over time compound to drive performance downwards. But it's too late to tackle them then. Whereas if you're measuring a lot, but a lot of insights, well, then you'll detect these discernible little things that will, you know, that will hurt you over time. It's kind of like, Adam, it's like the old saying. I mean, you know, when you go on a long journey, it's the pebble in your shoe that kills you. It's exactly that, you know, and it's kind of taken that mindset. I think it's a long answer to give you.
No,
but I think it's, if you respect the players enough or athletes enough to give them facts and deal in facts, well, then I think everybody's in a good place. Then it's quite hard to argue. Of course, people can argue, but the argument's kind of built on sand a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because I was just kind of thinking in my head here, you know, I'm a massive Juventus fan. So I used to follow a lot of the Juventus kind of fan accounts on Twitter. I don't follow them anymore for just because they are so infuriating sometimes, the opinions they have. But, you know, talking about the opinions that some people have maybe on social media of teams, you know, their coach will pick a starting 11 and you know, he'll pick a certain player over another player, and everyone on the internet be like, oh, like, why would he pick that player? Like, he must have something personal against the other player that's on the bench. You listen to the press conference and the coach says, you know, in training, this player is done really well and he's earned his spot in the team. But I think for some people, they might have their own perception of how the team should line up, and then their first kind of instinct is saying this is, you know, a personal reason why the player's left out, or this coach has no idea what they're doing, but they're not with the team as much as the coach.
Well, that's
kind of talking,
No, I was saying, it's you know, fans in general aren't able to get into the nitty gritty. Like, it's like they kind of have the, you know, it's a little knowledge is a bad thing. They don't really have all the insights. They have some of the information, but not all of the insights. So they don't quite get maybe why their favorite player is not playing, because, well, it's not responsible to play them all the time. Because then they burn out. But people don't get that. They don't see that. So, sorry, I interrupted you there. Yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was going to say, you know, saying that about, I mean, personally, I'm a huge sports fan myself, and, you know, I even preach that too. Like, you know, you can't act like you know more than the coach. But then I still catch myself sometimes when I'm watching American football or something where they run a play and I just get so mad. Like, why do they run that play? Like, they should have ran this play. It's almost the beauty of being a fan is you get so emotional into the game. But yeah.
Well, you see, it's kind of, I mean, as it goes back to kind of sometimes making the right decision but getting the wrong outcome, and equally well making the wrong decision and getting the right outcome. It's kind of interesting. I heard a poker player called Annie Duke. She's worth listening to, actually. Interesting character. But she was describing kind of exactly that, the right decision, wrong outcome. And it was Pete Carroll's call with the Seahawks against the Patriots a number of years back, last play of the game. You know, people kind of lambasted him for that. But in the fullness of time, when that was analysed, it was shown that would have been the right call 99% of the time. Just this 1% of the time that it would have failed just happened to be the Super Bowl. 99 other times it would have been perfect. You know, so it was the right call, wrong outcome. But equally well, you know, you can get the wrong call, right outcome, and that happens a lot as well. You know, it's like the YouTube clips, the Hail Mary throws in American football. Oh, what a pass! Come on, he threw it up in the air. You know, really, come on.
Yeah.
You know, so there's you know, the miracle catches, all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, there's lots of luck and there's lots of things there. It doesn't mean it was a great outcome. It doesn't mean it was the right decision in the first place. So, yeah, I think, you know, from a coach's perspective, I don't think people are ever going to get that completely. I don't think they're ever going to understand that completely. But I think when you've got coaches with a great coaching intuition, experience, knowledge, and a growth mindset, they'll make calls that by and large work, but then equally well, they'll make them that don't work, or they might be the right call, but it didn't work because you lost the game.
Yeah.
And the star guy sat on the bench or whatever the case may be. So I think you can only really kind of get judged in the long term. It's a bit like your investments in business. You know, you put X amount of money in this week, and next week it hasn't grown. It's that's a investment.
Yeah.
You know, you got to look at it long term, a year, 2 years, 3 years,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. But that's the nature of sport. I mean, that's why fans. That's why they go. It's
Yeah.
it's the talking moments. You know, it's that adrenaline roller coaster. Great 1 minute, crap the next minute. You know, and
Yeah.
that's what feeds it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's some great kind of food for thought to end this on, is that, you know, nothing in sports is really 100% zero. Like, nothing is ever a for sure guarantee, or else there would never be upsets and there would never be
Yeah.
broken plays or interceptions or fumbles or turnovers, whatever it may be. It's a probability thing. It's a 90-10
Yeah,
or 50-50. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, you're not dealing with software. You
Right.
know, you're dealing with humans.
Hmm.
You know, you're dealing with if you take, say, you take a game like ice hockey, right? It's probably a bit like Gaelic football, which is our game. Ice hockey, there's no offside in ice hockey, is there?
There is, yeah.
There is, yeah. But it
Yeah.
strikes me it's kind of like a 360 game. You gotta know what's going
It's
on all
very fast
around you.
flowing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you got a mathematician, I did it one time with our own game. You know, to extrapolate the amount of potential and possible events at any given time, it's ridiculous.
Mm.
It's such a chaotic environment. So anyone trying to make sense or apply a level of linear thinking to it, you know, it's like the roulette wheel in Vegas. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's everyone accepts that's a lot of chance. Your chances of winning are 1 in 20, or I don't know what it is, something mad. But it's the same as that. You know, like the puck hits the ice. What do you call the stick? The
Yeah,
puck
hockey
hits
stick, yeah.
the hockey puck hits the hockey stick half an inch higher or lower. Things change dramatically. You know, like the goalkeeper, you know, he stretches a half inch more, it doesn't go into the net. You know, it's a great save or whatever, and everyone's lauded as being a genius. But you know what? Maybe just this genetic freak was born with a 1 inch,
Hmm.
one leg a half inch longer than the other.
Hmm. Hmm.
Who knows? You know, and it's exactly that. But that's why people love it, I guess.
Yeah.
But
It's
it's
unpredictable in a
yeah, it's
sense.
unpredictable. Yeah, but then I guess you're trying to sort out a bit of rationality within that to try and keep your job.
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, Paul, appreciate you taking the time
I enjoyed
today,
it.
and
Good
you know, if you
conversation.
have some leftover birthday cake, I hope you enjoyed that as well. But
No problem.
again, a happy belated birthday.
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks, guys, again for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed any part of it, please share it with your friends and family, and I'll speak to you next time.